It is a cursed evil to any man to become as absorbed in any subject as I am in mine. Some call it evolution, and others call it God. Much love, much trial, but what an utter desert is life without love. An agnostic would be the more correct description of my state of mind. I ought, or I ought not, constitute the whole of morality. On the ordinary view of each species having been independently created, we gain no scientific explanation. In the long history of humankind, and animal kind, too, those who learn to collaborate and improvise most effectively have prevailed. The impossibility of conceiving that this grand and wondrous universe, with our conscious selves, arose through chance, seems to me the chief argument for the existence of God. Ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge. The more one thinks, the more one feels the hopeless immensity of man's ignorance. Such simple instincts as bees making a beehive could be sufficient to overthrow my whole theory. I never gave up Christianity until I was 40 years of age. Building a better mousetrap merely results in smarter mice. A man who dares to waste 1 hour of time has not discovered the value of life. It is not the biggest, the brightest or the best that will survive, but those who adapt the quickest. Nothing exists for itself alone, but only in relation to other forms of life. The world will not be inherited by the strongest, it will be inherited by those most able to change. The most important factor in survival is neither intelligence nor strength but adaptability. The love for all living creatures is the most noble attribute of man. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is the most adaptable to change, that lives within the means available and works cooperatively against common threats. Free will is to mind what chance is to matter. It is always advisable to perceive clearly our ignorance. The fact of evolution is the backbone of biology, and biology is thus in the peculiar position of being a science founded on an improved theory. Is it then a science or faith? The highest possible stage in moral culture is when we recognize that we ought to control our thoughts. The question of whether there exists a creator and ruler of the universe has been answered in the affirmative by some of the highest intellects that have ever existed. Not one change of species into another is on record. We cannot prove that a single species has been changed. Man is descended from a hairy-tailed quadruped, probably arboreal in its habits. It is impossible to conceive of this immense and wonderful universe as the result of blind chance or necessity. The loss of these tastes, for poetry and music, is a loss of happiness, and may possibly be injurious to the intellect, and more probably to the moral character, by enfeebling the emotional part of our nature. It is no valid objection that science as yet throws no light on the far higher problem of the essence or origin of life. Who can explain gravity? No one now objects to following out the results consequent on this unknown element of attraction. It is not the conscience which raises a blush, for a man may sincerely regret some slight fault committed in solitude, or he may suffer the deepest remorse for an undetected crime, but he will not blush. It is not the sense of guilt, but the thought that others think or know us to be guilty which crimsons the face. I believe we were all glad to leave New Zealand. It is not a pleasant place. Amongst the natives there is absent that charming simplicity, and the greater part of the English are the very refuse of society. We feel surprise when travelers tell us of the vast dimensions of the pyramids and other great ruins, but how utterly insignificant are the greatest of these, when compared to these mountains of stone accumulated by the agency of various minute and tender animals. I have no great quickness of apprehension or wit which is so remarkable in some clever men, for instance Huxley. It is not the most intellectual of the species that survives, it is not the strongest that survives, but the species that survives is the one that is able best to adapt and adjust to the changing environment in which it finds itself. If I had my life to live over again, I would have made a rule to read some poetry and listen to some music at least once every week. Animals, whom we have made our slaves, we do not like to consider our equal. Another source of conviction in the existence of God, connected with the reason and not with the feelings, impresses me as having much more weight. This follows from the extreme difficulty or rather impossibility of conceiving this immense and wonderful universe, including man with his capacity of looking far backwards and far into futurity, as the result of blind chance or necessity. When thus reflecting, I feel compelled to look to a first cause having an intelligent mind in some degree analogous to that of man, and I deserve to be called a theist. I conclude that the musical notes and rhythms were first acquired by the male or female progenitors of mankind for the sake of charming the opposite sex. A man's friendships are one of the best measures of his worth.